What would you do if you met someone who seemed beyond redemption? Someone locked away for life, carrying the weight of his crimes, yet asked for just one last wish before the end. Would you ignore him as just another criminal, or would you find the courage to listen and maybe even fulfill it? This is the story of Amber Collins, a Texas police officer, and James Henderson, a prisoner whose final request would change both of their lives forever. How a Texas female police officer fulfilled a prisoner's last wish. Texas summers had a way of draining life out of everything. The heat pressed down like an invisible weight, wrapping around the dusty streets, the steel fences, and even the gray concrete walls of the Harris County Correctional Facility. Inside, the air smelled of sweat, bleach, and hopelessness, a mixture Officer Amber Collins had grown used to over the years. Amber was 31, tall, with sharp blue eyes and blonde hair she kept tied in a tight bun under her cap. To the outside world, she looked every bit the no-nonsense cop she had trained to be. But on the inside, Amber often felt as though she lived behind bars herself. The prison's routines had shaped her life into something mechanical. Wake up, uniform on, shift in the cell blocks, paperwork, drive home, sleep, repeat. She told herself she had chosen this job to protect society, to keep dangerous men from hurting innocent people again. And she believed in that, at least most days. What she tried not to admit, even to herself, was how much of her humanity she had locked away in order to survive in this place. Don't get involved, her sergeant had said on her first day years ago. These men will play on your sympathy. They'll lie, they'll beg, they'll make you doubt yourself. You are not their friend, you are their guard. Never forget that. Amber never had, until she met James Henderson. That morning had started like any other. She walked through the metal detector, her boots echoing against the linoleum floor. The guard at the desk handed her the duty sheet. Cell Block D. New assignment. She glanced at it without much thought, tucking the paper into her vest pocket. Cell Block D had a reputation. It was quieter than the others, but not because it was safer. The inmates housed there were different, older, sicker, or serving sentences so long they no longer bothered to fight. Some of them barely had the strength to get out of bed anymore. It was, in the unspoken words of the staff, the block where men went to fade away. The moment she entered, she felt the atmosphere shift. The air was heavier, the silence thicker. Most prisoners kept to themselves, their eyes dull, their conversations hushed. But one man stood out. He was tall, broad-shouldered though thinner than he must have been in his younger days. His skin was dark, his face lined, and his hair was peppered with gray. He stood near the bars, posture straight, eyes calm yet piercing. There was a dignity to him, as if the cell around him was temporary and didn't define who he was. "Officer Collins," he said, his voice smooth, low, and deliberate. Amber's steps faltered. Her name. She didn't remember introducing herself. "Step back from the bars," she said sharply, regaining control of her tone. The man held her gaze for a moment before slowly raising his hands and stepping back. There was no hostility in his movement, no defiance, just quiet respect. That was James Henderson. Over the next week, Amber found herself noticing him more than she wanted to admit. Henderson didn't act like the others. He never joined in when fights broke out. He never cursed at guards. He spent hours writing in a worn notebook, pages already curled at the edges, and sometimes he hummed soft melodies that seemed like fragments of an old gospel song. The other guards called him the preacher, not because he was one, though rumor had it he used to attend church with his mother, but because he carried himself with a strange calmness, as though he had already made peace with something the rest of the world couldn't understand. Still, Amber didn't let herself dwell on it. In her line of work, noticing was dangerous. Sympathy was dangerous. Rules kept her safe, but rules didn't explain why. When she looked into his eyes, she saw not just a criminal but a man who had lived, lost, and carried regrets too heavy to name. One afternoon, as she made her usual rounds, Henderson spoke again. "Officer Collins," he said quietly. She didn't stop walking at first. "Keep to yourself, Henderson." But there was something in his tone, not demanding, not manipulative, just human. Against her better judgment, she paused outside his cell. "I know you don't owe me anything," he said, his voice steady but edged with something fragile. "But I need to ask you for one thing. Before I go." Her brows knit together. "What are you talking about?" Henderson leaned closer, his hands gripping the bars lightly, as though even that effort cost him energy. "The doctors don't think I'll last much longer. Cancer," he said simply. "Stage 4. They're just keeping me here until the end." Amber's chest tightened. She had seen sick inmates before, but rarely had anyone spoken about it so openly. "I don't want pity," Henderson continued, shaking his head. "But before I leave this world, there's one thing I need. One last wish." Amber froze. Every part of her training screamed at her to walk away. She wasn't here to grant wishes. She was here to enforce order. But in his voice, calm, honest, stripped of pretense, she heard something that stopped her in her tracks. For the first time in years, Amber Collins didn't just feel like a guard. She felt like a person standing in front of another person who was about to disappear. And she knew, though she didn't understand why, that her life was about to change. Amber Collins had been a police officer for nearly a decade, but nothing in her career had prepared her for the unusual sense of responsibility she felt toward James Henderson. After their first conversation, his calmness had unsettled her. He wasn't what she expected, a hardened criminal, bitter and angry. Instead, he spoke with measured words, often lowering his voice as though ashamed of its strength. A week later, as Amber walked the long, sterile corridor of the Texas Correctional Facility, a guard handed her a sealed note. From Henderson, he said simply. Amber frowned, tucking it into her pocket until her shift ended. That evening, in the quiet of her patrol car, she opened the note. The handwriting was neat, surprisingly elegant. "Officer Collins," it began, "I do not have much time left. I know my sentence, and I know the state will not delay it. But before that day comes, I have one request. It may be unusual, and perhaps you will think it undeserved, but I ask anyway. Please help me see my daughter, Maya, just once more." Amber read the words twice. James Henderson had a daughter? The realization hit her with force. She had never considered him beyond his prison uniform, beyond the label of inmate. Now suddenly, he was a father, a man connected to a child who was out there somewhere, carrying his name, his blood, perhaps even his smile. The letter continued. "She was 8 when I was locked away. She's nearly grown now. I don't even know if she hates me, if she remembers me, or if she wants nothing to do with me. But I dream of her every night. If you can find her, if you can just let her hear me say I'm sorry, then I can leave this world at peace." Amber's heart pounded. She knew prison regulations well. Requests like this were almost impossible. The system was strict, and exceptions were rarely granted. She folded the letter carefully, as though it were fragile, and sat for a long time in silence. That night, sleep refused to come. Amber kept seeing James's eyes in her memory, dark, tired, yet filled with something more than regret. Was it hope? Or desperation? She wondered what it would mean to grant such a wish. The next morning, she visited James during her shift. He was seated in the visitation room, shackled, yet strangely composed. "You wrote me a letter," Amber began cautiously. James nodded. "I wasn't sure you'd read it." "I did," she said softly. "And I need you to understand, it's not easy. What you're asking." She hesitated, lowering her voice. "It's nearly impossible." For the first time since she had met him, James's calmness wavered. His jaw tightened. "I know. I have no right to ask you. But Officer Collins, I'm not asking for my freedom. I'm not asking for mercy. I just want my daughter to know. I was thinking of her until the end. I don't want her last memory of me to be silence." Amber felt a lump in her throat. Something in his voice carried weight, not just of guilt, but of love. A father's love stretched thin across years of bars and walls. Still, she fought to remain professional. "If I even try, the department will see it as me crossing a line. I could lose my job." James looked at her steadily. "And if you don't, I'll go to my grave without a goodbye. Which is worse, officer? For me to lose my chance, or for you to risk yours?" The words cut deep. Amber stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. She walked out without another word, her heart hammering in her chest. For the next several days, Amber couldn't shake the thought. She researched quietly, using her own time, scanning public records until she found a name, Maya Henderson, age 18. She lived 2 towns away, working at a diner to support herself through community college. Amber stared at the screen, conflicted. She didn't know what the girl had been told about her father. Maybe Maya despised him. Maybe she had erased him from her life. But Amber also knew what it meant to grow up without a father. Hers had died in a car accident when she was 10. The emptiness, the unanswered questions, the what-ifs had haunted her for years. One evening, Amber made a decision. Off-duty, dressed in plain clothes, she drove to the small diner. Through the window, she spotted a young woman balancing trays, smiling politely at customers, her eyes weary yet kind. Amber's breath caught. Maya. When their eyes finally met, Amber's heart raced. She approached her cautiously after the shift, introducing herself. Hi, Maya. My name's Amber Collins. I work at the prison in Huntsville. The girl stiffened, suspicion flashing across her face. Why are you telling me that? Amber hesitated, then took a deep breath. Because your father asked me to find you. He wants to see you. Just once. The silence between them was thick, stretching into painful seconds. Then, Maya's lips pressed into a hard line. My father? She whispered, bitterness rising in her voice. The man who abandoned me? Who left my mom to raise me alone, then ended up in prison. Why would I ever want to see him? Amber swallowed hard. She had expected anger, but not the rawness of it. She saw pain in the young woman's eyes, pain that echoed her own childhood. Still, Amber found herself saying gently, because he's not asking for forgiveness. He just wants to say goodbye. Maya's hands trembled. She looked away, blinking rapidly, her emotions hidden behind a fragile wall. I'll think about it, she finally whispered. Amber nodded. It was a small step, but a step nonetheless. She left the diner that night with her chest heavy, knowing the choice was no longer hers. It was Maya's. And as she drove home under the Texas night sky, she realized something she hadn't before. This wasn't just about James Henderson's last wish. It was about healing wounds that had scarred a young woman's heart for a decade. Amber didn't know if Maya would agree. But one thing was clear. Her own life was becoming entangled with theirs, in ways she could no longer undo. The day of the meeting arrived with a humid Texas morning, the sky overcast and heavy, as if the world itself held its breath. Amber Collins arrived early at the prison, carrying a folder with all the necessary paperwork, though she knew it would be the hardest task of her life, convincing the system to allow James Henderson a single visit with his daughter. Inside the visiting room, the stark fluorescent lights reflected off the sterile walls. James sat at the small table, his hands folded in front of him, a calmness on his face that hid the storm within. Amber watched him for a moment, feeling the weight of the decision she had made. She had broken minor protocol, bypassing certain procedures, because sometimes the law had to bend to humanity. The sound of the heavy door opening caught everyone's attention. Maya stepped in, eyes scanning the room until they locked on her father. Her shoulders tensed, her chest rising in shallow breaths. Time seemed suspended. James rose slowly, each step deliberate, controlled. Maya, he said, voice trembling ever so slightly. She stared at him, a storm of emotions crossing her face. Anger, disbelief, confusion, hurt. You're here, she whispered. Yes, James said softly. I know I don't deserve this, and I know I've failed you in ways I can't fix. I just wanted to see you, to tell you that I love you, and that I've thought of you every single day. Maya's eyes welled with tears, but her lips pressed into a hard line. Amber could see the conflict within her. The daughter of a man who had abandoned her, yet the daughter who had a lifetime of curiosity and longing for her father. I don't know if I can forgive you, Maya admitted, her voice barely audible. James nodded. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I am sorry, and that I am proud of the woman you've become. For what seemed like an eternity, silence filled the room. Maya's fingers trembled on the edge of the table. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, she reached out. Her hand rested atop her father's. A single touch, but it carried years of grief, longing, and a fragile bridge toward healing. Amber watched from the side, heart pounding. She had witnessed countless interactions in her career, anger, resentment, despair, but never had she seen something so raw, so powerful, so transformative in a single moment. Tears ran freely down Maya's cheeks. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't need to say anything, James replied. Just knowing you're here, that's enough. They sat together for the hour the prison allowed, talking quietly, sharing fragments of missed birthdays, lost moments, and memories long forgotten. Amber remained at the edge of the room, respecting their space, while feeling an unusual swell of emotion herself. As the visit ended, Maya hugged her father tightly, a hug that spoke of forgiveness not fully given, but perhaps beginning to grow. James's eyes glistened as he embraced her back. For Amber, it was a moment she would never forget, a glimpse of humanity triumphing over circumstance, of love piercing the cold walls of confinement. When the father and daughter parted, James returned to his cell with a newfound peace, a serenity that had eluded him for years. Amber escorted him back, silently reflecting on the day's events. She realized that fulfilling a last wish wasn't about bending rules. It was about acknowledging the power of compassion, the importance of connection, and the possibility of redemption even in the darkest places. Outside the prison walls, Amber paused, taking in the humid air. She knew this story would stay with her forever, a reminder of why she had chosen this path, not just to enforce the law, but to serve humanity, even when it demanded courage and risk. James Henderson would leave this world soon, but the legacy he had created in that brief, fleeting hour with his daughter would endure. And Amber, too, would carry the lesson of that day, that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is grant someone else the chance to be human one last time. The story of a Texas police officer and a prisoner's final wish reminds us that compassion knows no boundaries, that redemption can arrive even in the harshest circumstances, and that a single act of kindness can change the course of multiple lives forever.